Well, welcome, friends. You have arrived for Let's Talk, Conversations That Matter, a series of public conversations hosted by the BTS Center. My name is Alan Ewing-Merrill. I serve as Executive Director of the BTS Center, and I'm logging in today from Portland, Maine. The BTS Center is building on the legacy of the former Bangor Theological Seminary. We're guided by the vision of human hearts renewed, justice established, and creation restored, and offering a variety of programs like workshops and retreats, learning cohorts, public conversations like this one, both online and in person, all aimed at cultivating and nurturing spiritual leadership for a climate change world. Today, I'm so glad to welcome you to this event with Reverend Nagy-Benson and Reverend Dr. Andi Lloyd, whom I will introduce in just a moment. Today, I'm joined by two of my colleagues here at the BTS Center, Kay Ahmed, who serves as our operations manager, and Nicole Dieroff, who's our program director. Kay is managing technology behind the scenes and making sure everything runs smoothly, and Nicole is serving as our chat chaplain, and she'll pop in a couple of times as we proceed. So thank you, Kay and Nicole, for being here. And thank you all for logging in today. On behalf of all of us who are part of the BTS Center team, just want to welcome you to this gathering. A special welcome to those of you who may be connecting with the BTS Center for the first time today. And a quick shout out to those of you who may have stumbled upon this live stream on Facebook Live. I'm going to toss it over to Nicole now for a moment, and she's going to invite us all to join fully in this space.
Thanks, Alan, and welcome to each and every one of you. I invite you to put on your digital name tag and indicate how you would like to be known in this space, and then open up the chat box to say hello to one another. First, I invite you just to share. Where are you logging in from today? Go ahead and put that in the chat so we know who is with us. Yay, I'm seeing Georgia, Vermont, Massachusetts, Maine, Ohio, Oregon, Virginia, Wisconsin. Oh, what a wonderful group of people from all across the country so far. Every once in a while, we have someone international joining us too. So lovely. Okay, my next question is sort of along the lines of what this book represents, but I invite you to reflect on and share in the chat. Who is someone you've written special letters to? And I invite you to share their first name and your relationship to them. Yay, thank you for what you're putting in here. Special letters to a professor, a sibling, future spouse, my dad, a student, a spouse, a friend, multiple friends, grandchildren. Beautiful. Thank you so much for those sharings and choosing to show up today. We know that you have choices in how you spend your time and where you go. So thank you for being in this online space for this particular conversation. Alan.
Thank you so much, Nicole. I love that question, and hopefully our conversation today and the book that Andi and Andi have written will inspire us to the practice of letter writing. So now I'm delighted to introduce our two guests today. My conversations for this partner, my partners for this conversation are Reverend Dr. Andi Lloyd and Reverend Andi Nagy-Benson. Andi Lloyd is pastor of the Trinitarian Congregational Parish of Castine, Maine, a United Church of Christ congregation. Andi received a PhD in ecology and evolutionary biology from the University of Arizona. And for more than 20 years, she was immersed in higher education as a professor of biology at Middlebury College, serving for part of that time as dean of the faculty and vice president for academic affairs. In her work as an ecologist, she studied the effects of climate change on forests in Alaska and Siberia, taught classes on plant ecology, evolution, and climate change, and authored or co-authored more than 30 articles or book chapters on climate change. And then Andi felt a call to leave academia and head to seminary, which she did, earning her Master's of Divinity from Yale Divinity School in 2022. And the other Andi Nagy-Benson, is an ordained minister in the United Church of Christ, currently serving as senior pastor of the Congregational Church of Middlebury, also a United Church of Christ congregation in Middlebury, Vermont. If you think about it, you probably can figure out geographically how these two connected. Andi's also an affiliate chaplain at Middlebury College, a graduate of Colby and Yale Divinity School, and has served congregations in New Hampshire, Connecticut, and Vermont, along with a little bit of teaching at Yale Divinity School and Middlebury College. Andi is currently working on his Doctor of Ministry degree in the Creative Writing and Public Theology cohort at Pittsburgh Theological Seminary. And the reason we're here today is because together, Andi and Andi have recently co-authored a beautiful and compelling book. I suspect some of you who are here today have read it, and some of you may have just found the title and concept compelling. Letters from the EcoTone, Ecology, Theology, and Climate Change. And Kay has just put the link to that book in the chat. So Andi and Andi, welcome. Thank you so much for saying yes to this invitation.
Thanks, Alan.
Really good to be with you both. So I wonder if you might start just by sharing a little bit about your mutual interests in ecology and climate. How did these interests emerge for you as an individual and then evolve over time? And Andi Lloyd, I wonder if you might start, and then we'll toss it to the other Andi, Andrew.
Sure. I think it's a pretty simple story. It starts with me spending a lot of time outside as a kid, which I think is how my mother managed having 4 children, was we got sent outside. And from a very young age, I experienced the world as an enchanted place. It spoke to me, it filled me. It was where I wanted to be. And somewhere along the line in college, I made the remarkable discovery that I could do that professionally. I could be outside professionally, studying the places that made my heart sing. So I went into graduate school in ecology and evolutionary biology, and that happened to be a time when climate change was started. Climate change research was starting to really amp up. So it feels a little accidental. I didn't go into studying climate change because I was interested in climate change. I went into it because I was really interested in trees and forests. And it just happened that at the time that I was in graduate school, it was this really fertile time for the launching of climate change research. And that's where my interest took me. That's what mattered to the ecosystems I was studying. So it started with curiosity and ended with curiosity.
Beautiful. I love that. And how about you, Andi?
Well, I grew up on the other side of Avon Mountain from Andi Lloyd. We didn't know each other as kids, but we played in some of the same woods. And I was outside a lot too. My mother was a mother of 4. So I think there was some household management involved too. But yeah, I just have been in love with the world since I was a kid. And, later on when I was in college, right, my friend Jenny Alfond started up the recycling program at Colby in the early 90s. And then I went to New Hampshire after Divinity School, and there was a fine pastor named Mary Westfall down in Durham, who was also a professor of biology, I believe, or some scientist. And she was on this environmental task force. So like right away in ministry, I was engaged with groups of people who shared an interest in loving this world by caring for it and speaking up for those maybe who have been marginalized or muted along the way. So it wasn't ever a problem for me to love the world. It was more a matter of a question as a pastor: how can I lead people to care for the earth in a variety of ways? And that manifested itself in a lot of different ways. We started a farmer's market at a church in Connecticut. Again, my wife Gwen ran that, organized it. We did some activism down in Connecticut with 350.org. And then that's just been part of my life and in ministry. It's a natural one. It's not a reach, and it comes from someplace really deep and important in me. So when we met, we had a lot in common in that way.
Thank you. I love hearing those stories and, thinking about the ways in which our life experiences all kind of merge to form the people that we become and the pastors we become.
Mm-hmm.
And speaking of which, Andi Lloyd, I'd love to hear a little bit more about your story. It seems like your path has been a little bit winding here, with maybe a detour or two along the way. You were, as I shared, for many years an ecologist, immersed in the world of higher education as a professor and college administrator. How the heck did you end up becoming a pastor? Can you give us a little glimpse of that spiritual and vocational journey here?
Yeah, how the heck indeed. If you had told me 6 years ago that I would be sitting in the pastor's office in a church right now, I would have had some questions. The short version of it is that I have spent most of my life on a spiritual journey that for a lot of years involved running away from faith, running away from God. I, for my entire life, have had a palpable sense of God's presence and a belief in God that defied anything I knew to say about God. I didn't have the language. I was not raised in a church-going family. And so I had this funny relationship with this really deep faith that involved a lot of trying to pretend it wasn't real. And that stopped working somewhere along the line. The pull to explore that part of me got really strong and really loud. And I eventually, not too many years ago, confided to a good friend that I had this belief in God and I didn't know what to do with it. He was a professor at Middlebury College, went to Nagy-Benson's church. And he listened to me really patiently for a long time and kept telling me that I should go to church. And I kept telling him that was a ridiculous idea. Because church is terrifying and I didn't know what happened in there and I didn't know what I believed. And so he finally resorted to, well, will you at least talk to Andi Nagy-Benson? I thought that was a ridiculous idea too, because I didn't know how to talk to a pastor. But eventually I did. And, and I think Andi may share part of that story. But I found my way to church eventually. And it was this life cracked open moment of coming home to a place I had never been before. And I thought it would end there very happily, but really quickly I started to feel this inarticulate sense that there was more. And that resolved itself into a sense of call to ministry. And in the early days of that, I love your path metaphor. I would have told you that I felt like I had been plucked up from one path and sort of airlifted over to an entirely different one. And one of the really joyful parts of this journey has been realizing in this really deep way that it's just the same path. It's a different stretch of trail, but it's not that. It's the same life. It's the same path. It's a lot of the same questions, which has been really beautiful and joyful. So
I love the language that you just used to describe that journey, the life cracked open moment, and the sense that there is more. And I think there's such power in your story of the kind of the integrating of ecology and theology that is what the world needs and what the church needs in this moment. So I'm really grateful. I have a friend who likes to say, God is such a nudge. And it sounds like God was a nudge for you. And on behalf of the church, I want to say thank you for listening and attending to that.
Well, I am grateful that God is such a nudge, because this has been it's been a hard and, life turned upside down journey at times, but it has been so joyful and so life-giving. I can't imagine I can't imagine my life had I not walked into Andy's church one day.
Amen. So let's toss it to the other Andy to kind of pick up there and tell a little bit more of that story about your meeting and your friendship. Do you want to share a little bit about that, Andy Nagy-Benson?
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure there are some pastors on this call, so
A few.
it's just a great good fortune when someone like Andy Lloyd walks into your church. And of course, Andy Lloyd stayed. Yeah, I mean, Andy came to a talk that I gave up in a mountain town where she actually lived at the time. And I didn't know her. I'd heard her name, a lot of mutual friends, but she was like the dean of faculty in a college town. So like a lot of people knew her name. But she hung out after the talk, and I could tell she had this like Samuel question, like, "Speak, Lord, for your servant is listening," look about her. And maybe having slight panic attack talking to a pastor, but she survived that, showing great courage. And eventually we had breakfast, I think that week, and it was the same kind of conversation. And I basically said what her friend had said all along: just maybe come to church, see what happens. And she did. Of course, once you get Andy Lloyd into your church, you realize how lucky you are. And our conversations went from, we did like a lexicon of faith, one-on-one tutorial, like a Kathleen Norris Amazing Grace kind of moment where what does sin mean? What does grace mean? And we moved into, I gave her a syllabus of maybe like 8 or 9 spiritual autobiographies. So she read the classics just so she could locate her call, or the burgeoning call, within the larger context. I think that was fruitful and certainly interesting to listen to from my standpoint. And then, and then of course, along the way, we realized that we have this deep interest in the intersection of ecology and theology, and maybe we should teach a couple classes, and we did at Middlebury College, and that was super fun. And along the way, we've become dear friends, and I suppose along the way, I've also been sort of a mentor through the ordination process. I've been a lot of things. And but the baseline now is just deep friendship. It's a nice connection, and I'm grateful that Andy walked into the church one day.
What comes to mind when I hear you tell that story is just mutual gift. I mean, I hear you, Andy Nagy-Benson, talking about what a gift it is when someone like Andy Lloyd walks in your church, but I can see what a gift you have been to Andy Lloyd. Not every pastor would know what to do with those conversations, or think to create a syllabus. And Andy Lloyd, I bet you read all of those books in like 20 minutes, right?
That syllabus made me so happy. That was amazing.
That's awesome. I love that story. So let's move on to the book. As I mentioned a few moments ago, you wrote this book, Letters from the EcoTone: Ecology, Theology, and Climate Change. And I just have to say what a gift it was to me to read that book. You both are just incredibly beautiful, compelling writers. And the whole concept of writing letters back and forth is just such a wonderful way to frame a piece of writing that delves into, so many important topics around climate change, but also, the ecology of a life and a friendship at the same time in the midst of a pandemic.
Yeah.
So I want you to read a little bit from the book. But first, congratulations for publishing it. That's no small undertaking. And I wonder if you could just preface your reading by sharing a little bit about how the book came to be, what the experience of writing it was like, and kind of what your hopes are for it. And either one of you can go first.
Do you want me to go?
Yeah, you go. You tell it.
I'll start anyway. Yeah, I mean, we were teaching in the spring of 2020 a semester-long class at Middlebury College called Hope in a Time of Climate Change. And of course, that semester got short-circuited, and we went online and got all sequestered in our Zoom rooms. It was a difficult semester. But that conversation kind of kept going by emails and phone calls, just to kind of process what just happened and what was happening at that time. You remember that was a strange time and a hard one. Eventually we were able to get together with people outside at whatever distance, and we did that locally and took a nice walk, and we just kind of processing the semester that was very weird. And I just asked a question about is the common good a thing in ecological science? And she gave me a great answer at the time, and then went home and wrote the first letter. And I remember receiving it and just thinking, wow, that's a beautiful letter. And eventually wrote her back, and then we just kept writing back and forth, not intending to write a book, but just to keep in touch, and in some ways keep the conversation that we were very much invested in the spring going. And about halfway through, we realized, I guess Andy shared one of the piece of a letter or something with a professor at the Divinity School, and he was like, yeah, maybe more people would want to read this. And then that sort of opened up a whole nother category of thought for us. But these were real letters that were sent in the mail, stamped, delivered. I looked forward to getting Andy's letters. I read them aloud to my family. They were just beautiful, and she raised the bar pretty high early on, so I had to think a little bit before writing her back. But yeah, it was lovely. And I guess Andy, you can speak to the hope of this, but that's kind of where this thing started.
Yep. Yeah, I mean, and it continued to be real letters even after we realized that it was becoming the book. We very clearly put that idea to the side and just continued to write letters that were a lifeline at times in that hard and challenging year. And I think our hope for the book, at some point in the book, we talk about this idea of this big round table, and that all of us need to be gathered around that table if we're going to address climate change. And our hope is that this book may entice people to that table, or invite them and entice them to create their own versions of that table in their lives, that it might pull people in and give them a way into the conversation. We hope that it's invitational, and that people find ways to not just read the book, but live it out in some way, if that makes any sense.
It does. I love it. And I share that hope. I really do. So let's dig into the book. I'm going to invite each of you to read a letter. And to those of you who are listening, I want to just encourage you to think about if you have a question. While Andy and Andy are reading, feel free to open the chat box and pop a question in there. You can send it directly to Nicole Deeroff if you want to send a private message, or you can pop it in publicly, and we'll kind of keep an eye on the chat box and try to weave your questions into our conversation. But first, let's hear some of your writing in your own voice.
Thank you. So we're going to read the first two letters. I'm going to read a slightly abridged version of my first letter. So July 27th, 2020. Dear Andy, it was lovely to see you last week and to walk and talk our way along the fields and forests. I wonder sometimes how long it will take in the post-pandemic future that is surely out there for the simple fact of physical presence to stop feeling precious beyond all words. I kind of hope it never does. The not taking simple things for granted feels like an unexpected gift. I've continued to think about the question that you left me with at the end of that walk. Does the idea of the common good have meaning in the ecological realm? A few days of mulling it over, and the response I gave you in the moment, yes, unambiguously, still rings true. Yes, unambiguously, and it's complicated. Complicated in a good way, in a way that leads me to think that the richest answers to that question may lie at the borderlands between ecology and theology rather than wholly in either. My yes is rooted in the core insight that ecological science offers about the nature of our world, that it's a deeply intrinsically interconnected place. Your question prompted me to look up Ernst Haeckel's original definition of ecology written in the 1800s. He defined ecology at its birth as the science of the relations of the organism to the environment. All life is inherently relational, connected. That's both the starting premise of ecology and the product of more than 100 years of doing ecology. Interconnectedness. It's one of those insights that's simultaneously obvious and easy to miss, astonishing and easy to take for granted all at once. The reality to which ecology points us is one in which our very lives depend on other species. Our bodies are built of atoms and molecules that have passed through countless generations of other organisms. The oxygen we breathe is the exhalations of millions and millions of years of growing plants. Ecology asks us to see that all of us, all living things, are woven together by visible and invisible flows of energy, matter, nutrients. Even the plant gametes that the checker spot butterflies outside my window are ferrying from one coneflower to the next. In the moments when I manage to pause and really notice that reality, I feel thoroughly wonderstruck. Too often, though, I don't notice it. Interconnectedness is the fundamental nature of our existence, but it's easy not to see it. I wonder sometimes if it's the very boundedness of our bodies, the embodied illusion that we're somehow discrete entities, that makes it easy for us to believe instead in our own autonomy, our separateness. As I write this, I'm thinking about the field onto which we were looking as we sat and talked last Wednesday. That field is a pretty simple ecological community, but even so, it contains dozens and dozens of species, plants and animals, fungi and microbes living together, interacting, depending on one another. Even in a relatively simple community like that one, the scope of those interactions borders on bewildering. The daily drama of that field involves eating and being eaten, competition and cooperation, sex and death, disease, symbiosis, decay, and the cycling of atoms around and around and around. I imagine that if we could see each of those interactions as a thread tying pairs of interdependent organisms together, the field would start to look like a fabric. And better still, we'd discover sitting there that those threads draw us in too. We're part of that interdependent web of ecological connectedness, all bound up in the midst of it, whether we recognize it or not. But to return to your question, I think that the idea of the common good as it exists in the ecological realm flows from that reality of interconnectedness and the interdependence that arises from it. Try this on for size as an ecological definition of the common good. No species can exist apart from other species, so whether we like it or not, we, the denizens of planet Earth, need one another. We are ultimately all in it together. Things get trickier from there, ecologically speaking, but also really interesting. When I think about the idea of the common good, I think about it as the opposite of self-centered behavior. I can act in ways that center my own interests, or I can act in ways that further the common good. Am I going to go on as many airplane flights as I want, irrespective of the impact on climate change, or am I going to choose to forego my desire to travel for the sake of mitigating climate change? That contrast between self-centered and other-centered behavior makes abundant sense in the realm of human decision-making. It's harder to apply ecologically, though. Is it meaningful to say that a red-tailed hawk soaring over that field near where we were sitting is self-centered for seeking to snuff out the life of a meadow vole? It's self-interested, but I don't think I'd be inclined to assign a value judgment to a hawk in the same way that I would to a human who consistently chooses self-interest over the interests of others. In other words, the good part of common good is not free of ecological complexities. Different species have different goods, at least in the short term and at the scale of individuals. The red-tailed hawk might well define good as having lots of meadow voles to eat today, while the meadow voles would surely define good as not getting eaten by a hawk today. Nature's full of conflicts of interest like that, and it's full of self-interest. And to complicate it further, what's good for an individual might differ from what's good for a group of individuals. It's good for an individual hawk to eat as many meadow voles as it can, but it's really not good for the population of hawks to run out of meadow voles. The population benefits from a restraint that is not in the individual's interest to exercise. Ecological interdependence doesn't have to involve altruism or self-sacrifice, although it can and does. Interdependence is a reality that undergirds a system full of creatures eating other creatures, full of death, full of disease, full of competition and limited nutrients. And yet we're all in it together. Both things are true. And both things can be true, I think, because there are checks and balances within ecological communities that normally prevent one species from consuming all the resources. We don't need an individual red-tailed hawk to decide to forego lunch in order to avoid extinguishing the population of meadow voles. Such conflicts of interest are resolved for the most part by the very interconnectivity that I started with. If the red-tailed hawks start to eat too many meadow voles, prey gets scarce. And either the hawk's reproductive success goes down, fewer hawks eating voles, or they switch to some other prey item, fewer voles getting eaten. The hawk doesn't need to decide to further the common good. Humans, however, have a unique, as far as we know, ability to engage in ethical reasoning and make choices that appear to be against our own immediate short-term desires. We can choose the common good, even if it conflicts with our perception of our own self-interest. But here's the thing. I'd argue that ecologically speaking, the common good, the flourishing of all life on Earth, is absolutely, categorically, unambiguously in our self-interest. If we are all in this together, then we don't thrive if other species don't thrive. So maybe what ecology offers to this conversation is the somewhat paradoxical insight that the root to self-interest lies in caring for species other than ourselves. In other words, the dichotomy between self-centered and other-centered, between acting for myself or for the common good, doesn't make sense ecologically. If we can't live without other species, acting in ways that allow them to thrive is the very definition of our self-interest. Maybe the ecological truth is that our self-interest, at least over the long term, and the common good are the same thing. The issue is not that they are in conflict, but rather that we fail to see our own self-interest clearly, because we fail to see our interconnectedness. We see instead our short-term desires, and we mistakenly believe that they are the same thing as our self-interest. We fail to see that living as if we were the only species that matters is a dead end, ecologically speaking. But now that I've written that, I wonder if that's really a uniquely ecological insight. How do you understand the distinction between self-interest and the common good theologically? I'm obviously drifting here toward, if not entirely past, the limits of ecology. Maybe the ecological reality of an interconnected and interdependent world shares a border with the theological and ethical concept of the common good. And maybe that borderland, I'm so tempted to call it an EcoTone, is a place where we can put our understanding of the world as it is alongside what we know and can dream of the world as it ought to be. Maybe that borderland is the place where we come to understand what it means for life to flourish. A long walk through such a place sounds like just the thing right about now. Peace, Andi.
August 21st, 2020. Dear Andi, grace and peace. The letter you wrote reads like the well-spun web of connections it describes. My goodness. Thank you for your tour of ecological kinship. How a question like mine can yield a letter like yours is beyond me, but it's clear I need to ask more questions. Near the end of your letter, I felt a rush of pride at the recognizable sound of EcoTone. Wait, EcoTone, I know that word. A few years back on Easter evening, I tucked that word inside a short poem about Christ appearing and disappearing like a firefly, where field and forest meet. Where field and forest meet, EcoTone. Where two biological communities exchange gifts. Anyway, I like the word. I also like the idea of paddling on the brackish water of Common Good Pond, where ecology and theology can swap stories. So on Monday, I went to Kingsland Bay with Ella, Mary, and Rachel. Dad days in the summer are the best. On the way up Route 7, we stop at the Junction store. I go in for provisions. There are a dozen or so people in there. Then a 30-something white male walks in past the masks required sign. He's not wearing a mask. As I see it, everything about his body language is saying, nope, not wearing a mask. The rest of us keep looking at him without trying to be obvious. Meanwhile, he's walking up and down the mini aisles looking like he wants someone to get in his face about responsibility so he can get in theirs about freedom. It doesn't happen. He pays and walks outside to his idling truck. As I replay that scene, your question back to me seems particularly relevant. How do you understand the distinction between self-interest and the common good theologically? Up front, I want to say this question of yours has made me freshly aware of my need to check in with self-interest. What does that word mean theologically? Does it mean that based on all things I could be interested in, I am most interested in myself? Does it mean selfishness, self-preservation, survival? Is it an expression of self-worth, self-love? Is it why our planetary house is on fire? Is it why we want to put the fire out? Is it possible that self-interest is roomy enough to hold all these moods and meanings? From what I understand about the spread of COVID-19, it would have been in my self-interest to ask the guy at the store to put on a mask. Then again, given how pissed off he appeared to be, it may have been in my self-interest to keep quiet. And while I don't presume to know what the maskless man was thinking, I do wonder, was it in his self-interest to be unencumbered by a mask? Did he not care about the other people in the store? Does he think it's a hoax still? Or did he forget his mask in haste on his way to drop in on his girlfriend's mother, who's been feeling lonelier than usual these days? Self-interest is complicated as we all can be, which is why I had to look up the word when we got home from Lake Champlain. The main definition tilts towards selfishness, one's personal interest or advantage, especially when pursued without regard for others. However incomplete this definition may be, the phrase "without regard for others" chafes my understanding of the common good. The common good has to do with conditions necessary for everyone and everything to flourish. And self-interest, by definition, undermines these conditions. Maybe that's why the word self-interest makes me uneasy. I think that this feeling springs from my core belief that love your neighbor as yourself is the common good, and it's how we get there. And self-interest can get in the way of this. Self-interest brings to mind something in me that wants to grab first, give second. Without regard for others, oh Lord, I've been there lots of times. I've been caught and carried by the current of self-preoccupation. I've rejected wittingly and unwittingly the truth that I am part of an interconnected, interdependent reality beyond the half acre of my own little life. I know way more than I'd like to admit about the habits of self-absorption. I've been really far from home, deep in prodigal territory. And despite 24 years of standing in pulpits and connecting the dots between the common good and the kingdom of God, what have I really done to be of use to my neighbors whose needs are deep? These markings of self-interest are mine, but not mine alone. The human tendency to bend towards selfishness and away from the common good has been a thing for a long time. Maybe that's why Israel's prophets went ballistic over corrupt systems that used poor and powerless people, and why the prophets were constantly telling the high and mighty to get over themselves. And maybe that's why St. Paul wrote to the church in Philippi, "Do nothing from selfish ambition or conceit, but in humility regard others as better than yourselves. Let each of you look not to your own interests, but to the interests of others. Let the same mind be in you that was in Christ Jesus." When I read scripture, I often recognize the needful reminder to aim my interest beyond the end of my nose. The same goes for reading theology. In fact, I just finished Walter Brueggemann's book, Journey to the Common Good. The book begins, "The great crisis among us is the crisis of the common good, the sense of community solidarity that binds all in a common destiny, haves and have-nots, the rich and the poor. We face a crisis about the common good because there are powerful forces at work among us to resist the common good, to violate community solidarity, and to deny a common destiny." Powerful forces at work among us? Indeed. Within us too, as far as I can tell. So sages of our tradition, Aquinas and Ignatius, Rauschenbusch and Brueggemann, to name a few, keep turning our attention to needs beyond our own. And the Westminster Catechism keeps asking, what is the chief end of man? And it keeps answering, man's chief end is to glorify God and to enjoy him forever. Now, when it comes to arresting climate change or living in harmony with the great web of life, I would agree that the idea of self-interest can include us acting in ways that allow the species we are dependent on to thrive. But things get tricky when self-interest makes our personal good the end goal and finish line. Theologically, this doesn't work so well. As I see it, a Christian's pursuit to serve her neighbor and care for creation leads to God, our chief end. Does this mean self-interest is anathema to one's spiritual life? No, I don't think so. There's a hue of self-interest that matches self-love. And of course, self-love is God's stamped. Love your neighbor as yourself. Self-interest is assumed in the Great Commandment. I sometimes forget that. A few years ago, a sweet man approached me after worship and asked me why I left out "as yourself" from my benediction. I had said at service's end something like, "Love God, love your neighbor, go in peace." This man shared with me with equal parts earnestness and gentleness how much he needed to hear permission to love himself again. Oh, yes, right. Thank you. Had I assumed that self-interest simply is and that the common good ought to be? Maybe so. But that kind soul helped me see that we cannot avert the crisis of the common good if we fail to include ourselves as objects worthy of holy love. After all, we are parts of an interconnected, interdependent reality. And for us to be protectors and conveyors of that beautiful truth, we need to include ourselves in the work of the common good, just not at the expense of everyone else at the Junction store. I wish you well, my friend, Andy.
Wow, thank you so much for reading those. I feel like that was just a sacred experience, and hearing you read your words is really different than my experience of reading the book, words on a page. So thank you, thank you. We are nearing the end of our time. Andy and Andy have agreed to linger for a bit for Q&A. We're going to stop recording at 1, stop streaming, and if you need to leave, by all means, we invite you to go with our blessing. But we are going to linger for those who want to for a little Q&A. And I noticed, Nancy, you have a great question in the chat. Andy and Andy, I invite you to take a look at that question. It has to do with the hawk and self-interest, and Vol's a great question. But in the interest of time, I'm going to toss it back to Nicole to share just a couple of opportunities that are coming up. And Andy and Andy, I want to invite you to have the final word right before 1 o'clock as well. So Nicole, can I draw you back into the conversation?
Yes, please. And thank you for those letters. First, I want to invite all of you to join in another Let's Talk event that's coming up on Tuesday, June 13th with Maya Williams, who is the Poet Laureate of Portland, Maine. And they'll be talking about and reading from their new collection of poetry. You'll hear more about that event soon. Also, I want to let you know about our annual convocation gathering, which is coming up at the end of September. 2 days full of respite, learning, and community. This year in person in Hallowell, Maine, and focusing on the theme of kinship, reweaving the great web of belonging. Our keynotes include Victoria Loers, author of Church of the Wild, and John Bear Mitchell, citizen of the Penobscot Nation. And our immersion leaders include Andy and Andy. So this would be an opportunity to spend time in person with these two amazing individuals. And registration goes live today for convocation. So I invite you to consider registering early and joining us for this event, continuing the journey with the BTS Center in this way.
That could not be more timely, because the theme of this year's convocation aligns so perfectly with the words that you all have just shared, and we're just delighted and honored that you can be a part of that. And that's September 28th and 29th, and the link is in the chat, so you can check that out. As I mentioned, Andy and Andy are going to linger for a bit. So I'm going to invite you first, though, if either of you or both of you have just a final word to say before we reach the 1 o'clock hour.
I would just say thank you. It continues to feel like such a gift that people want to listen in to this conversation. I'm grateful for the conversation. I'm grateful to all of you for being here, and super excited for any questions for those of you who can linger.
Yeah. Nothing more to add to that. Yeah,
Okay.
thank you very much. It's also really lovely to see a long time. My first conference minister, Carol Carlson, is on this call.
Yay.
From who I admire dearly, and I'm glad to see her today.
Wonderful. Thank you both. And thank you all for being here today. We're out of time. But again, I'm really, really grateful for this conversation. Andy and Andy, thank you for your ministry. Thank you for writing this book. And thank you for sharing some of your time today. Thank you all for joining us. We're going to stop the recording and end the Facebook Live, but we'll keep the Zoom meeting going for a few more minutes. And I see another question popping in the chat. So linger if you can, go in peace if you wish.